It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Sammy James. Welcome to the show. Today we're looking ahead to Saturday's trip to Southampton, and we'll look at our wounds from Sunday's pretty painful SW6 derby. We won't spend too long on that. We'll also discuss a certain Scott Parker who's back in the Premier League, and we'll dive through some of your emails. I'm joined today on the Thursday Club by Jack Collins. Hello.
Hello, Sammy. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Happy St. George's Day.
Thank you, mate. I really, really appreciate it. Patron saint of a lot of different countries. So, yeah, shouts out to St. George.
Okay. Thought that would wind you up more than it did.
No, mate. I'm open. I'm open. I'm happy to celebrate all days and all countries and all nationalities. It's great stuff.
This is really annoying. I bet our producer Yasmin that you would say that because this doesn't go out on St. George's Day, I can't say St. George's Day.
No, mate, you can celebrate whatever you want. I'm very open to... Mate, you can do whatever you like.
People on the YouTube will see me get out a crisp £10 note and hand that straight to Yasmin. That's really annoying.
You've known me a lot longer than Yaz has, and she's read you like a book there.
I really was hoping that you would be a smart ass about that, and then you weren't. God's sake.
Mate, celebrate what you like.
Okay, let's do the final word.
I've done my final word on Sunday, so actually I'm going to flip this over and actually ask you what you made of it, because Yaz and I and Farrell spoke on Monday's podcast about the game pretty fresh off the back of it. I've had some time to think and reflect on it a little bit more, but what were your thoughts and your overall kind of take on what happened on Sunday?
Yeah, it was just a bit gut-wrenching, wasn't it? The way it happened, the way that I really thought that we were in a good position, even though the second half, I think now I've thought about it a bit more, we were bad.
Yeah.
I really thought with 10 minutes to go, we had it. I remember thinking, like, we're a bit under the cosh here. I just felt like Fulham had everything and Chelsea were not really creating a huge amount of chances. I'm a bit baffled by the substitutions. Yeah. I'm still baffled. I think what I found a bit odd in the days since is does seem to be a lot of heat coming Marco Silva's way, which I think is like fully acceptable. But I think just like it's possible for a player to have a bad match, it's possible for a manager to have a bad match and it doesn't signal the end.
No.
It's felt a little bit like people are now wondering, is this the end of Marco Silva's time and all of this? And you're like, I don't think it's anything like that. I think he made a poor decision and he acknowledged it. He acknowledged on the pitch afterwards, he spoke to Fulham TV and he spoke in his press conference and he said that the Kearney substitution was wrong.
Yeah.
He got it wrong. He made a call. He thought that getting a bit more possession in the game was what the game needed. I think it's just a bit crazy, isn't it, when it wasn't just a benefit of hindsight that we're all saying that the Kearney substitution didn't work. Yeah. We all saw it when it happened thinking, this doesn't feel like a Tom Kearney game. And once again, I don't think this is the end of Tom Kearney's tenure at Fulham.
No.
I think Tom Kearney has the time and the place.
Yeah, it's a tough week for TC because obviously this was his 350th Fulham appearance, right?
Yeah.
And off the back of it, and look, I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. We talked about it on Monday of being like, that was definitely not the move. Right, and he had a bad game. I'm sure he'd be another one to put his hands up and acknowledge it, right? But like ultimately, you kind of look at those and you think, I think the fact that that's been the story and that's been the narrative has overshadowed the fact that 350 is an incredibly huge achievement for him to make that many appearances at the club, a legend at the Cottage. And I think that maybe what happened on Sunday has maybe overshadowed that in a way that I felt seeing the pictures and the thing that the club posted about those 350 games, I was like, oh, feel a bit now. And not that the criticism was wrong. I don't think it was. And I don't think the market should have brought him on at that point. But, having seen that, it felt like maybe some of that vitriol went a little bit over the top. Maybe not all from us, but like from a perspective of, I was like, oh, okay, maybe we should have just reined that in a tad more.
Well, look, I think we can, just because he hit a certain number, I think the criticism's still valid. I just don't think it's Tom Kearney's fault. It wasn't, Tom Kearney didn't substitute himself on. Tom Kearney is Tom Kearney. I don't actually know if Tom Kearney 2 or 3 years ago would have done great in that situation.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that he was just the wrong... Tom Kearney's fantastic when you have got lots of the ball. His cameo against Brentford at home, I think, was iconic and changed the game. His possession and his incisive passing, it was his pass to Robinson, who then found Wilson at the very end. And it kind of took a player like Tom Cairney. No, it wasn't the world's best pass. It was just incisive enough to get us going.
Yeah,
and
but it
move forward.
was thought through and it was instinctive, you know.
Yeah.
Like, and that is two phrases that don't often go together. You know,
Yeah.
he knew what he was doing, and yet it was in the moment, in the fluidity of it. And there are games where you want him in there, right? To
Yeah.
pick that lock, and I think that's really, really important when you're looking at it from that perspective. It just wasn't his game, and I think Harrison would have been a more sensible decision given where we were and the fact that we were kind of scrapping in the trenches on the edge of our own box at that point.
I also, and I said it in the quick take, and I appreciated you guys mentioning it. It was Yasmin actually who mentioned it on Monday's podcast, that I still believe that if there was a game that was crying out for 5 at the back,
Yeah.
and making that sub, which has been effective in this situation.
Yeah, but I wonder if Diop not being on the bench there affects that. You know, like,
That's Marco's choice.
yeah, of course, and that's fine. And look, it was Cuenca on the bench, so it's not like it was, you know, there was no options to go and do that, or Kenny could have switched into to
And
right
Kenny could
centre
have
back,
right
as you
centre-back.
said. But like, I wonder if Diop was on the bench, and yes, as you say, that was Marco's choice. But if he was there, I wonder if that's the move he would have made.
Yeah. Look, I think we can all talk about the subs for a long time. I think it was a bad call. I think the thing about it was that whilst Chelsea had a lot of possession in the second half and they had a lot of ball, that is what they've done a lot of times this season. You know, speaking to Chelsea fans after
Speaking
the
to
match.
Peter last week, he said, right, what's the one thing you do to frustrate Chelsea? You sit a block in front of them and you make them pass it around the back. And Fulham didn't quite do that because there were forays forward, but there was a level of that I think was happening until Tyreek George potentially came onto the pitch.
Yeah, but it was all kind of at arm's length.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did change it. I felt like with Nicholas Jackson on the pitch, they weren't going to score.
Agreed.
And he took a pot shot. Well, that's what it was. That equalising goal was just a little bit of a snapshot. It was inches away from Leno's grasp. Leno tips that around the post. Maybe it all pans out.
I mean, look,
okay.
it's a phenomenal strike, and we shouldn't take away from that. Like, because yes, there's a little bit of kind of, oh, let's hit this and see what happens. But on the turn, you know, you could see it from the moment it left his foot. I was like, that's in. I can, you know, there's that feeling about it. So look, Kid came on and changed the game.
Do you want a positive slant?
Let's have it.
So, some Chelsea fans I've heard weren't upset that they won, but they are slightly upset that they won.
Yeah.
And could we potentially try and market this as 4D chess from Fulham?
We can if you want. I'm not going to buy it, but we can if you like. If that's where you want to market it, then you go for it.
That this is a kind of
I'm
result,
not believing my own sell here. This is not, you know, this is Avon at your door.
because I think that Chelsea fans probably believe that if they either get into the Champions League or they win the Conference League, then the Chelsea hierarchy might think that Maresca has done enough to keep his job for next season.
Yeah.
But Blues fans do not like him.
No, they don't.
Maybe we've had a helping hand in keeping the Chelsea banter era going.
Potentially. Yeah, I mean, let's see how we go. But yeah, I just think it was one of those games that it's frustrating. You take the rough with the smooth. It was, as we said, like a kind of mirror image of what happened on Boxing Day, you know, on Easter Sunday, which is, you know, kind of something in itself. But just one that's just incredibly frustrating to take, I think, in terms of I still am frustrated with Fulham's inability to take control of the game at the back of the first half. I thought we were the better side, but, you know, to really kind of lay on that siege towards the end of half time. And at the time, you know, we took ages over that free kick, right? That actually we were a little bit unlucky. It was a great defensive header from Cucurella to take it away from Sander, and it goes out for the corner and Fulham aren't given the time to take it. And the players go mad about it. And I was kind of watching it being like, well, we've taken ages to take the free kick. Like, why are we complaining so much about not being able to take the corner? But maybe that changes things. If we could score from that corner, it really does flip the game on its head.
Yeah, we weren't good enough in that second half.
No.
I think there's no bones about it. Like although I think you expected a response from them, I still think our complete lack of attacking intent was on us.
That's partly to do with the fact that the Rodrigo wasn't on the bench, right? Like
I agreed with that.
He was reticent to change things up because there is no real faith in Carlos Vinicius, which is fair enough considering, as Jasper said, he's been putting out cones for quite some time on the training pitch. I thought he came on and put himself about, but that was about all he did. And, you know, bringing on a Harry Wilson who's been out injured for a long time, you know, Adama who didn't look particularly interested in the game. All of that is frustrating in certain elements, but equally you can only work with what you've got as a squad, and there wasn't loads of options to do that. Do I think that there were better options than what we did? Yeah. But you can still look at that and think, well, does Raul stay on for that long when he looked knackered?
He wasn't influencing play anywhere near as much as he was in the first start by the end.
And I think that, if you have Rodrigo there to try and chase the ball into space, you force Chelsea back another 10 yards, and that changes the way that the game shakes out. So part of it down to, a little bit of bad luck in terms of injuries and small, we think, injuries for ESR and Rodrigo, but just a frustrating one.
Was the Smith Rowe? I don't actually know if there was an injury talked about with Smith Rowe.
Yeah, that was the thing discussed. It said Smith Rowe and Rodrigo Muniz both out with small injuries picked up in training. That was the messaging before the game. Okay,
because I worried that there might be something more like he'd actually been dropped from the squad.
Well, it was a weird one because on Friday in the press conference, Marco said he basically had the entire squad to work with, minus Reece Nelson. So it was a little bit weird that he wasn't there, but, I kind of trust that if Rodrigo was fit, he would have been on the bench. So something must have happened.
Yeah. So 2 bits of news, I guess, for the Premier League that have happened since the weekend is we've got 2 new teams confirmed to be coming up into the division. Leeds United. Okay, fine.
The all ex-Fulham wing force of Dan James and Manor Solomon coming to haunt us.
Yeah.
There you go. There's a Fulham spin.
They'll definitely, one of them, get a goal against us next season. But more interestingly, I think, is Scott Parker's Burnley from a Fulham perspective, because I think a lot has to be said, and a lot is said by Fulham fans about Scott Parker. I mean, he's still sung in relation to Marco Silva.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the vitriol perhaps has passed.
I don't think it has.
I think the vitriol has passed in terms of that song is still sung because of Marco Silva, not because of Scott Parker.
Oh, right, yeah, I get that. But I think a lot of Fulham fans still do not like Scott Parker.
I think there's probably an element of being like, ugh, but rather than like, I hate you.
Yeah, but look, 3 promotions now.
Yeah, 3 different clubs.
2 of them automatically. Obviously, the Fulham one, he just about got over the line.
But he got over the line.
But this Burnley team, it does feel like the Scott Parker image in its purest form, right? He tried a little bit to get this defensive style with Fulham, didn't quite perfect it. And then Bournemouth, I think he was again trying, but didn't quite have the right tools. It feels like Burnley have just fully bought into this Scott Parker defensive first philosophy.
Well, it fits DNA, right? We talk a lot about club DNAs, and it's something we were discussing actually in relation to Chelsea and Maresca on Ranks a couple of weeks ago. We did an episode about why it isn't working, why it doesn't fit. And, there is an element of that, Fulham aren't a team with a particular, I think, distinct DNA in the way that they want to play football.
Do you not think?
No, I think that, you look at actually the most successful Fulham teams, in recent history. I wouldn't say that Roy Hodgson's Fulham played particularly pretty football. We were pretty attritional, very much more than the sum of the parts. I think the links you can draw between this Fulham and Roy Hodgson's Fulham are to do with the players who were cast aside by other clubs and have been kind of reclaimed and, made into something special at the Cottage.
I've always thought that Fulham play pretty football.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. In the year that Fulham went and their most successful, perhaps, Fulham didn't play pretty football.
Was it not quite pretty? It was a weird one.
To quite Mike Bassett, we played 4-4-2.
Yeah, but it was quite attractive on the eye-ish. We did build up play through the back. It was direct to the wingers at times. It was a little bit old-fashioned, I'd say. Yeah. But I wouldn't ever say it was never long ball and massively set-piece reliant.
We were quite direct and we were quite set-piece reliant. I think we were both of those things. Think about the goals that Breda Hangeland scored in that period of time. The amount of goals we picked up from goals. And look, I'm not saying that there's anything right or wrong with this. I'm just making a point, right?
Okay.
The point being that I think that if you were to say that Fulham had a DNA, and I was actually kind of going to agree with you, I think it's a little bit more fluid than perhaps people think. But, I think there is a demand to play some sort of attractive football at the Cottage. I think Bournemouth have felt a little bit similar in terms of not necessarily, knocking the ball around the back, etc., but they demand intensity. After Eddie Howe, they needed someone to come in, and Iraola's done that very well in terms of those are the demands that fan base have grown to over the last couple of years. And I think that with Burnley, Parker's style of kind of football fits best as a DNA because of what they've experienced over the past decade or so. And whilst I think that fans took to Van Stan Company's style and be like, wow, this is something different, when it didn't work in the Premier League, it was like what? Like, okay, fine. Like, as in, we need to find something a little bit close to home, and that's why I think that Parker's style probably fits a little bit nicer there.
I mean, their defensive record, incredible. The whole not conceding more than one goal in any game this season in the league is just astonishing. Now, a lot of that might come down to the quality in the Championship. I mean, the top scorer being Boya Signs for Norwich with 17 goals, and then behind, and he's like out ahead.
It's a bit of a low year, yeah. And this is a Norwich side who've just sacked their manager and appointed Jack Wilshere, so it's not a vintage Norwich either.
No, so it is a bit of a weird season, and there obviously aren't like goals flowing everywhere in the Championship. I guess like my point is, do you think that this might be third time lucky for Scott Parker? Obviously, I said this bit on Twitter. There's a lot of Fulham fans being like, oh, we scored 9 goals at home. And there's a lot of bad memories from that.
Yeah, it was real tough.
From that season.
But also, like, it was also a really tough period, right? Like, obviously, COVID and all of those things. So, like, the fact we couldn't go and watch it, etc., probably didn't
also, we had,
help.
like, 4 weeks between winning the playoffs and the season starting.
Yeah, there were a lot of circumstances that didn't fall in our favour that year. But I do think that, actually, when you look at the team that we had in that season, Fulham would have done better with a different manager, with perhaps a more experienced manager who was willing to let them off the leash a little bit, right? So that's fine.
But I wonder if...
Do you think this... I think there's probably a couple of things at play here, right, in terms of Burnley. And I would probably extend this a little bit to Leeds as well, in that, when Fulham went up the first time, we weren't ready. We spent all of that money and we were like, okay, this just hasn't worked. Went back down to the Championship. Came up the second time, and weird circumstances, as we say, with the kind of lack of a break between the season. And we kind of sort of tried to, attrition our way towards it. It didn't work. We didn't score enough goals. Fine, relegated. Third time, it felt like there was a balance between those two acts, right? And I think that's where you look at Marcus Silva and go, okay, Fulham have become a very, very good defensive unit over the course of the Marcus Silva tenure. In the Championship, it was full off the leash, let's go and score and annihilate teams, fine. But that was reined back in the Premier League, and there was that adaptation period. So you kind of are somewhere between Jukanovic's like gung-ho football and Scott Parker's quite misery defence ball. But I think that with something like there's also a level of experience that starts to flow through the side at that point. What did we do last time that we could change? What gets better? And bear in mind that Burnley have been on a pretty similar journey, right? They've gone up, down, up, down, up, down, and now they're back up. And you're kind of like, okay, they've probably learned their lessons a bit from trying to out-football people with company as a playing group. Take Parker out of it for a second. Yeah. Yes, he's going to change the style from that anyway, but they'll have learned their lessons that they can't out-football the Premier League. They'll have learned their lessons from the last time they went down, obviously where it was Sean Dyche for a long period, where they were like, okay, we actually just didn't score enough, we didn't create enough, and they'll probably look as a group of players to find a happy medium there. And I wonder if there is something in this. We talk about teams coming up from the Championship to the Premier League and going back down again. And one of the things that's interested me is you're kind of like, it feels like the teams who haven't had that experience and haven't had that kind of bouncy for a little while are the ones really struggling. And yes, okay, you can point at Forest and Bournemouth, but Bournemouth were in a relatively similar situation to us in that they'd been down and up. Yeah. Forest, I think, ended up with a lot of money spent, etc., and a lot of things didn't work, and eventually they found a solution that has worked, and they deserve immense credit for finding that. But that's a different sort of way of doing things as well, and they only survived that by the skin of their teeth. Whereas I think that when we're looking at this Leeds and this Burnley, they're probably a little bit more world-wise as a group of players. And I think that the people in charge are probably now a little bit more world-wise in what they need to do. That doesn't mean they'll stay up, but I think it gives them a better chance than the 3 that came up this year.
Yeah, I just think also, sadly, I think we might be the stepping stone for Parker in terms of learning how to keep a team in the Premier League.
Also, managers do learn, right, over the course of things. And he will have learned from these experiences. Early on in the season, I think I tweeted it right at the start of the season, actually, that I was saying that Burnley looked quite effusive in their play at times. Yes, they were keeping clean sheets, etc., but you saw them blow a couple of teams away in the early doors of this season. That's been reined in. But I was like, maybe he has learned his lesson about not being quite so defensive. And I think there probably is a level of just growth within a manager of learning, these are my principles. And, his principles clearly are you don't concede goals first and you build from there. And, that's fine. It doesn't make for the most attractive games of football, but that's fine. And it's a perfectly viable solution. But I think that he probably has learned that he can't be quite so much on the handbrake in order to actually survive. And I know it'd be interesting to see how it develops from here.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, ultimately, it's in Fulham's interest for the promoted teams to come up and not be good. Although there is obviously that slight element of a competitive Premier League is probably more entertaining. What's happened this season isn't been very fun, but of course we want Fulham to stay in the league.
Yeah, give me non-entertaining and us in mid-table every time.
Well, exactly. Like, I mean, it is benefiting us and also like benefiting clubs like Fulham. It is this kind of feedback loop, isn't it? Is when the clubs go back down, obviously clubs like Fulham only get richer in comparison to those coming up. And actually, when the teams yo-yo, the parachute payments then come back to us. So I think Premier League clubs are set to get a rebate of 51 million from Burnley and Leeds coming up. So that's about £3 million per club coming straight back into the Premier League. And a lot of people
back
claim
into the coffers.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people obviously angry, thinking that money should then get spread out to other championship clubs or go further down the pyramid.
Yeah, which is probably fair.
That is probably the right place. But from a Fulham perspective, like, I mean, we are entering a point potentially where the Premier League might be starting to become a Super League, and it's kind of by accident.
Yeah, we might have got in just at the right time. So who knows?
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be interesting to see how these next crop, get on. If all three promoted clubs go down again next season, I think there probably will be an inquest.
Yeah.
Like 3 years in a row after only happening once before in the Premier League era would be really quite something.
Who would you like most out of the clubs in and around the playoffs?
Sunderland. I got a real soft spot for Sunderland.
Right.
And also I like seeing Paddy Roberts do well.
Bristol City for me.
No, I don't want to go back to Ashton Gate ever.
Ashton Gate's good. What's wrong with Ashton Gate?
We just lost there a lot.
Yeah, we don't have a great record. I get that.
We had I've never really forgiven Bristol City and Tammy Abraham for whacking us 4-1 that time in the Cottage. So no, thank you. Give me Sunderland. I want more trips to the northeast, and 2, I just really like Sunderland as a club.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'll go for Bristol City. If it's I think they might play each other in the playoff semi.
I don't think it's going to be a Bristol City versus Sunderland playoff.
No, more likely to be the semi. But anyway, we shall see. We'll take a break there, and afterwards we'll look ahead to our trip to Southampton on Saturday. Part 2 of the Fulhamish podcast. Sammy here with Jack Collins. We're off to St Mary's on Saturday to face the Rusk again.
Sounds like a biscuit. Bit tougher in real life.
I mean, I don't know why I'm so worried about this match. Well, I do know why I'm worried about this match.
The Rusk. No other club is going to have to face the Rusk twice. It's absolutely deeply unfair.
Obviously, we got rusked just before Christmas when Southampton came to the Cottage and got a 0-0 draw. I've got a good question actually later on about missed opportunities, and Southampton at home might be very high in that one. Look, this is a weird game, right? Southampton have been historically bad. They're currently level with the points tally that Derby County got in that infamous 07-08 season. Would you like a bad omen? How many points did we give Derby County in the 07-08 season?
4, 2.
2. How many points might we give Southampton?
4. I'm also scared about this game, but for different reasons to your omens. I'm scared about this game because I've seen it in real terms, what happens when you get relegated. And especially when you get relegated and you literally get to the point where you're like, this is now a free hit. And I think we saw it under that season where Scott Parker took over from Claudio Ranieri, where we got relegated and then suddenly we started to play some quite good football. And it was like, well, where's this been all season long? And there was an element to that, which I think there probably is similarly with Southampton here, considering they've already sacked Ivan Juric after, pretty much day after relegation, of being like, this season doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens from here to the end of the season. We are rebuilding, we're resetting for next season. And he gives everyone this kind of like, go out there and do what you want, that level of confidence. And it scares me. And look, I watched them at West Ham last weekend. To be honest, I thought they were a bit unlucky not to get all 3. Like, yes, they conceded a dumb goal, right? And that's fine. And West Ham fans and players were all absolutely raging about the performance from their respective, and they should be. But actually, the equaliser was no more than Southampton deserves. Like, they actually did play some really nice football.
Well, missed a couple of big opportunities before that. Tyler Dibbling had a really big chance just before the equaliser.
There was a couple. And it was the best I've seen Southampton play for a little while. Look, I've been maintaining this line basically in the sand since about February that I think Leicester are worse than Southampton, and if you offered me playing Leicester or playing Southampton, I would take Leicester every single day of the week, because I think Southampton are just not quite good, but they haven't given up, whereas I think Leicester have completely and utterly given up, and that I think is a scary element of this. Now look, none of this is to say that Fulham shouldn't go and win this game. Right? Like, we have things to play for. Southampton don't really, aside from breaking that record, but they play Leicester in a couple of weeks, so they'll probably do that anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that there is the scary element of it is that they can just go out there and be like, cool, if we lose 4-0, we lose 4-0. We're going to go out there and give this a go. And for me, I think that's a kind of really nasty prospect when we're still a little bit, I think, in our own heads about the fact that we have the opportunity to get into Europe this season.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Southampton team as well, and whilst I understand that it's not good enough for the Premier League, I also cannot understand quite how they're on 10 or 11 points, rivaling Derby.
I can tell you why. It's because they tried to play a style of football that didn't work, and then they waited way too long to change it. And by the time they waited to change it, they may as well have stuck with it, because then it took another 3 months to work out how to play Juric's style of football, which they never really got to grips with. And it just all felt like a big mishmash. It's very similar to our season, with Ranieri coming in off the back of Jokanovic. We made the decision earlier, and that potentially picked us up a few points, along the way. But actually, it felt like one of those ones where if you're making that kind of switch from a stylistic nature, you have to do it early enough that you're giving someone the time to potentially dig you out of there. By the time that Juric came in, Southampton were already relegated. It was done. It was done and dusted. They were already too far off the pace. And so I think the difference with this is that, they had not a historically bad squad in the way that Derby were. This is a historically bad element of how things are run, but it is just an exacerbation of what happened to us under that first season up, I think.
But I'm just looking at some of the players. Aaron Ramsdale's laughed about a little bit, but good goalkeeper.
Ramsdale, the relegator.
Yeah. Harwood Bellis, good player. Kyle Walker-Peters, good player. Onuachu, not great, but he is about 8 foot tall. They've obviously got Dibbling in there. Flynn Downs isn't a back player. I don't actually, Sulemana, Fernandez, none of them absolutely horrifically bad players.
How many of them would you sign for Fulham in the summer?
We'd sign Dibbling, but obviously join the queue.
I'd sign Mateus Fernandes. I really like him. And to be honest, I was absolutely stunned that Sporting let him go. That came about. The reason that they made that deal happen is because basically out of nowhere, Sporting been like, we can't do this, we're not selling him. And then on the flip of a coin, they were like, we need to make this amount of money this far. So he went for a cut price fee. I take him. I think he's a really good footballer.
And Harwood Bellis you would probably take for future.
Yeah, Harwood Bellis is a good footballer. I wouldn't be averse to that as a concept.
I wouldn't take Aaron Ramsdale over Bernd Leno, but I would, comfortably have him in a squad.
Yeah, he will get a Premier League.
And if you need,
I meant really kind of for a first.
And if you need
how many of them get into the first team is probably the argument I'm actually making.
Walker-Peters over Castagna at a push?
Maybe, yeah.
But do you know what I mean? It's not I'm not looking at this. I don't think there's a single Leicester player I would take.
Bobby Deckard.
Well, obviously I would, yes.
I'd have Bobby Deckard over Reed.
Come back, Bobby.
I wouldn't mind Steffi Mavididi. I think he's a good player.
And then, I know there are several Ipswich players who, I would take.
Yeah.
The obvious being to lap up front, but probably also... Well, you wouldn't take
Davis as backup.
Not over Robinson, but yes, as backup. So there are a few players. Look, I think this is a really dangerous game as well. I watched only the match of the day highlights of West Ham Southampton, but I was like, they look pretty good here.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend watching the whole game. It wasn't great.
The shackles really are off, and we've actually got experience. I think the bigger example of a relegated team causing Fulham big issues post-relegation. I think it was the 11-12 season. I may have been 12-13. I think 12-13 if I'm not mistaken. Reading came to the Cottage and won 4-2.
Yeah.
Relegated Reading. And Fulham had something to fight for. I think we wanted to get into the top 10, or were we chasing Europe potentially? Yeah. And anyway, we were on we were looking for a win, and Reading came and absolutely thumped us. And it was just a shackles off team, and Fulham were caught cold.
Yeah.
Weirdly, I'm actually relatively glad this is at Southampton and
I actually agree.
Not at Craven Cottage, because I think if it was at Craven Cottage, I'd be seriously worried.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I think this is a better game for us to play away. And I think that maybe Southampton being a bit shackles off might play into our hands at times. But, there are big question marks over who's going to be fit to play this game. Is Rodrigo going to be back? Because I think that this is a game for him if he is. As this one opens up, you just like throw him in there and just let him cause chaos for a bit, because they're not going to like that. They're not going to want chaos. They're going to want to be able to control a game of football. And I think that Rodrigo might be the move in that kind of situation. I wonder if it's a game for Adama, is the other thing I would probably argue. There are spaces, they've been exploited by high presses and players really kind of getting into them at the time. So whilst I was incredibly disappointed with his performance when he came off the bench against Chelsea at the weekend, I wonder if this is the kind of game where he could cause problems by just sort of legging it around up top.
Yeah, I mean, the way that he was walking before Pedro Neto's win-up was incredibly infuriating. The other thing I think about Southampton, which makes me a little bit worried, is whilst they have lost 4 of their last 6 and only drawn a couple of them, there is just a slight sense of... I feel like this happens after you get battered week after week, as you start, a bit like kind of the Andorra and Liechtenstein effect. You start to learn how to not get battered too badly, and you manage to hold out teams for longer and longer. And I think a good example of that is a rampant Villa went to St Mary's a couple of weeks ago. They did miss a couple of penalties. They missed one of the penalties in the 90th minute, but they did miss a penalty. But it took Villa until the 70th minute to actually get
find the
front.
breakthrough. And I think fans will get frustrated at St Mary's, from a Fulham perspective, if we don't get into this one early. So, yeah, it's a big game. And whilst I do have faith that we go and win it, I don't think it's going to be easy as maybe people are thinking it's going to be. I can't see another 9-0 against Southampton, let's put it that way.
No. I mean, honestly, I will take a scrappy 1-0 right now. We just need to win.
Yeah, shake your hands on 3 points. I need 3 points.
Yeah, we just need to get a win and get over the line. Because weirdly, you look at obviously the run-ins of both Bournemouth and Brighton, and obviously now Brentford are now in this...
100%,
in this race. Like, Fulham's run-in isn't super easy. It's a little bit kinder than both of the other teams.
There's more winnable games in it, I think, is the thing. You're looking at it and thinking, okay, we've seen that Villa obviously are going to have one eye on the FA Cup, which they potentially could win this season. They're in a great place, even with that loss to Manchester City. That's a really difficult game, and the City game on the final day, I think, is really hard. But aside from that, you're kind of looking at it and thinking, okay, these are winnable. They're difficult, but they're winnable.
Yeah, I mean, like looking at the other teams here. I mean, we've got Bournemouth's fixtures up here. They've got Man United on the weekend. Obviously,
they'll probably win that.
You would back Bournemouth to probably beat United at home. Arsenal away, but then it's an Arsenal in between their 2 Champions League games. So is Arteta going to play first team? They've got Villa at home, which you imagine is going to be a very, very tough game for them. They've then got City away, again, very, very tough.
City away is more tricky, I think, than City at home. I know that sounds like really obvious, but there are some teams you're like, I'd rather play them at their place. City are not one of them.
No. Bournemouth then have Leicester on the final day. So I think if we're in a fight with Bournemouth on the final day, it's not looking great, because you'd imagine that's a guaranteed 3 points for Bournemouth. If they need to beat Leicester at home, they will. Obviously, we have City on the final day.
I think I said this on Monday, and we can go through Brighton and whatever as well, but I think 9 points from here is enough for a Fulham or a Brighton. I think Bournemouth, if they get 8, they'll be all right.
Okay. I mean... I think the thing is, it's Bournemouth's to lose, because you're right there. In the Arsenal way looks horrible, but actually in real terms and between those 2 Champions League games, it's probably not as bad as you think. There's going to be serious rotation in that. We saw Brentford
side.
Go and get a point at Arsenal a couple of weeks ago.
Man United feel beatable at the moment. Like that Bournemouth Villa game could be really interesting because it's at Bournemouth. And, they gave City a really good go, the other week. So, I'm not saying that they're going to go and win all those games, but I think that their run-in potentially on paper is harder than ours, but actually in real terms might not be.
Yeah. Then it's Brighton. They've got West Ham at home on Saturday. You would obviously... Brighton are in a little bit of free fall right now, so it's very hard to predict what they will do. Home against Newcastle is their game after that.
They'll potentially lose at Molineux against Wolves as well.
Liverpool at home.
Yeah, I think maybe Brighton gets 6 from here.
And then they've got Spurs.
I think they beat West Ham and they probably beat Spurs on the final day. But I don't see them picking up points against. Maybe call it 7. Like, I think they will lose to Newcastle, and I think they will lose to Liverpool. And I just can't see them beating Wolves in the form that Wolves are in right now.
Yeah, you got to hope as well. Like, I think in both of these, actually, this weekend's quite crucial, right? I think if Bournemouth and Brighton fail to get results against West Ham and Manchester United
Suddenly we're in the box
home,
seat.
I think you'd like to think, okay, here we go. This weekend's pretty crucial.
We're in the
this
box
race.
seat, but we're only in the box seat, even if we beat Southampton. But if Brighton and Bournemouth win as well, I don't think we're in. I don't think we're in pole.
Yeah.
I think we're only in pole if we win and both of them lose.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it obviously is a new car.
It's a bit of a mugs game guessing, obviously, but it is what it is. We're going to have to try and predict some things.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before the podcast, like, should we even mention Europe? Really, it feels quite churlish after what happened on Sunday.
The interesting run-in is Brentford's one, which is probably the softest of the lot, but they've got 2 points to make up.
Okay, I haven't actually fully looked at this, so let's explore quickly Brentford's together while we're here. They've got Forest in the rearranged game away next week. That's obviously very difficult.
Yeah, it is tricky. But Forest, I don't think are as good as they were. Even with that win against Spurs, I think they looked,
motivation for them at home.
I think they looked very, very vulnerable on the counter, and that's not something we've associated with Forest this season. And actually, it's the kind of bread and butter to this Brentford side. I'm a bit worried about that game.
And then, yeah, you would actually argue there's nothing to stop Brentford, apart from Fulham, hopefully, getting wins from all of their final 4 games. Man United at home, Ipswich away, obviously relegated almost certainly by then. Then they've got that Fulham game, which is the penultimate
If
match.
they get 12, they'll get into Europe. They win those last 4 games, they'll get into Europe. Yeah, it's horrible. Absolutely rancid, I know. But
it's in our hands. Because we play them. So
We
I think
do.
that game could be a decider.
I hate it. Like, I hate that they're back in this conversation, but they are. And it would be remiss not to mention them in these conversations because they forced their way back into it with that win over Brighton.
Yeah. Oh my word. I mean, it was one of those, the win over Brighton. We all wanted it to happen because we were so focused on Brighton that we didn't actually realise
We wanted that game to be a draw. We really wanted that game to be a draw.
We didn't realise what was coming in the rearview mirror. I promised I'd go on to this question, so I'll go into it now. Matthew Wall says, "Hi guys, I listen, I email. I love the pod. Love it. Ahead of the Southampton game, which I'm more nervous about than I'd care to be, I was wondering where we went wrong this season. It's such a tight race for 8th and we've left so many points on the table. It made me wonder which was the worst missed opportunity to take the points. For me, it's West Ham at home. They were abject that day and we were so dominant. And then Danny Ings comes on with 10 to play and you just know what's going to happen. Notable commendation for Everton away when, again, we dominated but didn't get the second. Other contenders, United at home, though neither of us were very good. West Ham away, worst performance of the season. Brighton away, and then he says Bournemouth at home should be mentioned, but in truth we were not worthy of a win. Interested in your thoughts from Matt.
100%. It's the West Ham home game for me and the Everton away game. They're the ones that stick out like sore thumbs because those points, I think the thing with the Southampton game is that we just weren't great on that day. We really didn't look, there was that Adama chance, if you remember.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I didn't look like we were going to score. And I think with the United game, we were just so poor that it was petering out into a 0-0. So that's a point dropped rather than 3. Whereas I feel like the 2 against West Ham, the home one in particular, where we were so brilliant, and we ended up
should have been a 3
away.
or 4-0 that day, shouldn't it?
And it was very similar with Everton away. Like the amount of times we created unbelievable overloads against a very poor Everton at that moment. Like those are the 2. There are 4 points there that I look at and I'm like sickened by.
Yeah, I think I do think probably though for me I think if you look at the end of the season and you look over the whole one, if we were 2 points short, I think I would look at Southampton before Christmas and just be like, what the hell were we doing?
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is that we didn't turn up that day. And you mentioned it earlier about Marcus Silva, right? You said sometimes you just have an off day, right? Like that day was just an off day that Fulham had. Whereas the annoying thing about the West Ham and the Everton games was they weren't off days. We were really good. And we still managed to drop 4 points from winning positions in those 2 games. And that irks me much more than just having a bad day in front of goal against Southampton.
Yeah. Weirdly as well, I don't know why. Like obviously we should never have expected to go and win at Anfield, but we did score in the 82nd minute and I wasn't actually that worried about Liverpool scoring. That one was particularly painful. And obviously we will look back on Sunday as
we
a
will
missed
look back on
opportunity.
Sunday, but again, like I think that when I look back at it, and look, it's obviously different for different people, and everyone has to kind of examine it in their own sense. But from my perspective, it's those performances where we absolutely 100% deserve 3 points and didn't get them that are really frustrating. And I wouldn't put Sunday into that category whatsoever because we didn't deserve all 3.
No. West Ham at the time, we all knew as well. We all knew we'd really
sucker punched.
Let that
the
one.
air came out of the cottage at that moment.
And actually, I actually think that Matt makes a good point about West Ham away. Again, we did absolutely batter them that day, and we just conceded.
We shot ourselves in the foot multiple times that day. And I think that's even more frustrating. But I can't blame anyone else for that. Whereas the other ones, I'm like, ugh, it's just, ugh.
And on the subject of Manchester United, I saw an interesting stat that if it wasn't for the bottom 3 and Fulham, they'd have won 3 games this season.
Fantastic. Excellent. Great stuff. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.
Well done, Fulham. Manchester United would be genuinely in the relegation fight if it hadn't have just been mostly for Fulham and then picking up very easy wins against the bottom 3.
Fulham, friend of Manchester United.
At least we knocked them out of the cup. This one from Mitchell. You'll love this email. Hey lads, just wanted to put a little shout out in for Andreas Pereira over the last few months. Ever since he was getting booed off the pitch, he's really turned his form around and got a lot of the fan base on board. I agree. I've heard Andreas Pereira chants, I think, for the first ever time in the last couple of games. Obviously, he isn't the long-term solution because he just isn't quite the player we need to help us move up the table. But comparing his situation now to a few months ago, I've got to say it's impressive he's managed to keep his faith in the badge. I still have hope for Smith Rowe to work out, but it seems like that might be a next season fix. Anyway, love the pod from New Zealand. Thank you, Mitchell.
Cheers, mate.
I couldn't agree more. I think Andreas has been brilliant in the last few games. And yeah, when you think about, it was Spurs away, wasn't it, where those comments had come out in the week about him wanting to join Marseille, which it did feel funny that he was showing his full arse for a club in Ligue 1. I couldn't quite get that, but
wow, I wasn't expecting you to phrase it like that, but okay. Cool, man, you do you.
But he has really that day I remember thinking he'll never play for Fulham again, because I just thought, you've really seemingly gone out on a limb. Look, he apologized. Well, he didn't apologize. He said that he was misinterpreted for those comments, but I think we all read the interview and were like, maybe a little bit, but you did kind of say it. But the way he's turned it around has been nothing short of impressive. And I think Mitchell's completely right for me with Andreas. It's not going to quite work. I don't think he's quite the player. He just has some shortcomings, but I will never fault his effort and I will always wish him well. And actually, I love that he shows passion. He still kind of G's up the crowd. I think he still plays for the badge. His full heart and soul is in every performance, and that is something to be commended. And I'll criticize for a lack of effort, but it's hard to criticize when actually all that's really missing sometimes is a little bit of talent's not the right word. Quality, yes.
Yeah, I mean, look, Alexa, play the Hives, hate to say I told you so. But ultimately, I think people have started to realise a little bit the difference between having a player who runs in the number 10 and a player who doesn't. It's as simple as that sometimes. You have a player here. Andreas was absolutely unbelievable in that first half against Chelsea. And to be honest, he was one of the very few players who came out with credit in the second half as well, because he ran himself into the ground. And yes, okay, the final ball is missing sometimes. That's fine. But give me that 100 times out of 100 over a player who can maybe play the final ball, once every 10 times, but isn't going to do any of the running. Fulham lack the players who actually put in that shift in those areas. And when you have a Raul up front, who really, Raul works so hard, but doesn't, if he leads the press in that game, he goes off at half time with cramps. He's already doing everything else from a holding the ball up perspective. You need someone to be that runner. And Andreas is that player. I love him. I really, really do hope that we continue with Andreas, that he continues to be that number 10, because I think that having a player in there who brings the intensity and dynamism he does trumps having that killer ball once every so often 100 times out of 100. I will always take the player who puts it in. And yes, there are frustrations, fine. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, he took loads of really good corners at the weekend, because he didn't, right? But there is a level to his game that never drops really below a 6 out of 10 because he constantly puts it in. And I think that for us right now and where we are is more important than actually, bringing in a player who, an Emil Smith-Rowe who can occasionally, yes, pull out a moment of magic, but leaves us basically playing with 10 when we're against the ball.
Yeah, I think Andreas is right for now. I do think that next season we have to have a better option in the 10. We have to have someone that can assist and score.
Careful what you wish for, I always say.
But you cannot have a number 10 that's getting the numbers that he is.
But he's not really playing as a 10. Like, this is the thing. He's playing as the most advanced 8 in the system. His work rate is the thing that he's in there for. Now, the question becomes, okay, if your number 10 is not being that player, or your number, your hybrid here, if you will, isn't playing that role, are you getting deeper? You're getting players from deeper who can slide those balls in, who can, play those passes in from deeper roles. And maybe that means that you shift the shape of the midfield around a little bit. Maybe that means that you shift the shape of your attacks around a little bit, and that actually quite a lot of our incisive passing comes off that left flank when Iwobi's drifting, right? And that changes the way that you're building up your attacks and the patterns of play that come through it. So I think it's important to note that, yes, I can understand what you're saying about, assists and goals from that area. But actually, if you're playing with a midfield 3, if that looked on paper, right, as Berger at the base with Lukic one side and Andreas Pereira on the other, would people be saying the same thing? Because Sasha Lukic doesn't pick up that many goals or assists. And no one's criticising that element of it. And rightly so, because that's not Sasha's game, right? Yeah. But the point I'm making is that Andreas plays a little bit further forward, but he's being asked to do a very similar role in terms of what he's doing off the ball. And I think that where we're actually looking and the way that Fulham create an attack comes down the flanks, right? We speak about this route that Anthony Robinson takes down that left-hand side, that Alex Iwobi steps off the inside, that Willian did before him, right? Where those triangles that are played in that area basically form the basis of Fulham's attacking patterns. So you're asking your number 10 to basically effectively be, one, the first press, and to lead that press when it drops into a 4-4-2 out of possession. But also, on top of that, to become the third man in that midfield when your winger drifts off the wing. So he's not playing in the same positions, not picking up the positions. If he was missing 5 chances a game, I'd be like, fair enough. But he's not, because that's not the role he's being asked to play within this system when we have the ball. And I think that that's worth noting when you have these discussions.
Yeah, fair. I get all of that, and I'm here standing up for Andreas, but at the same time, I just think, and look, it's a discussion for the summer, it's a discussion for next season. But maybe if we get into Europe, maybe like this is a squad building exercise where you just need bodies, and therefore keeping someone like an Andreas would be incredibly useful. But assuming that we don't, I think that you cannot have 3 players in midfield who each season are unlikely to go over 2 goals. You need more. You need someone who can get more or contribute more, at least be assisting. I mean, and if you can accommodate Lukic and Berger because they are a solid partnership, then you need someone that, look, we all think that probably that man is going to be Emil Smith-Rowe, or we're going to try our hardest to make Emil Smith-Rowe work. Either that, or we're going to cut our losses this summer if Marco kicks up a fuss. We'll wait and see. I love Andreas. I think he's doing so well. I really respect Andreas. It's just sadly that end product, and and his set pieces just aren't quite as on point as they need to be.
I do think that there is probably a point where at some point somebody probably needs to take those set pieces off him. And I think we're seeing it a bit with Harry Wilson when he was flying at the end of December. He started to step up a little bit more from those kind of areas. But with him out of the side, there's not really been anyone to make those calls. So it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of shakes up going forward.
Yeah. This one from Jack Freed, I think is how I pronounce it. Hi, Fulhamish, long-time American listener. My dad took me to that Juventus game when I was 8, and I've been a supporter of Fulham ever since. Wow. What an experience that must have been.
What a first game.
You must have thought it was always like that.
Jack, I'm really sorry for the disappointment since.
Why are we so Fulhamish? What makes Fulham so Fulham? One week we turn up and beat the league leaders. A week or so later, we would most likely lose to the bottom of the table. Yes, we probably will. Our fan base also seems inconsistent, especially on social media. One week everyone is loving our squad, and the next week we are saying that they shouldn't play the sport. And brackets, he says, guilty of this too, just something I am noticing. I think we would be a better team if we were consistently supportive of the club we love. Keep up the great work, from Jack. Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen it this week.
Emotions, man, but that's the game.
I would definitely say that I'm pretty sure all fan bases are like this, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm assuming so. Like, obviously, you'll hear it even in today. If you listen to Monday's podcast and the way that we reacted, Yaz Farrell and I, and then the way that you and I had a discussion at the start of this podcast, you'll notice a difference in the tone, right? Like in terms of how it's described. And that's just time and emotion, being given time to kind of heal itself in some ways. So I think that, yes, most fan bases are like this. There was a brilliant article on Mundial actually recently, and it was from a Wolves fan, James Bird, who was writing about this point. And he was saying, when you're criticising your club being bad, look at the table and point down every club and you go, do you reckon they're happy? Do you reckon they're happy? Do you reckon they're happy? And he was like, I reckon there's about 4 fan bases in the Premier League who are happy. And he was like, and one of them's probably Fulham. In his article, he was talking about Fulham, right? He was saying, I reckon they're quite happy with how their season's going. He was like, I reckon Newcastle are quite happy because they've just won a cup. He was like, I reckon Liverpool are quite happy, but also they've got this whole scenario going on with Trent, which is kind of dominating the headlines. He was like, Arsenal have had a good season, but that fan base isn't happy because they feel like they've underachieved in the league this season. Chelsea aren't happy. United aren't happy. Spurs aren't happy. Look at all the clubs in the Premier League. City aren't happy because of what's happened this season. They're happy that they've had a great spell, but you kind of look at it and think, is anyone ever happy? and I suppose like this fan base you say are probably happiest this year, Newcastle, Nottingham Forest. After that, what is it? Bournemouth and us? Villa, baby? Like
Brentford?
Yeah, quite happy. But again, there was criticism of their start to the season. And I think a lot of their fan base are like, if we just started like this, we would have been right in this conversation, maybe not even for Europa Conference
They
League,
also hadn't won a game at home from December to April.
Yeah, like there are bad bits everywhere, right? So like, it is weird and it's a strange thing, but that's what the game does to us, right? Like this is what it's about. It's about feeling those emotions. It's feeling that love, feeling that passion, and feeling so strongly about stuff. And yeah, okay, sometimes that goes overboard, but I think generally everyone probably feels quite similar.
Yeah, and I think what's been interesting in the last couple of months from Fulham, and I don't remember a period where it's been quite this extreme. The ups and downs of these last few months from a Fulham perspective,
it's because it's every week,
have been really high and low. And like with Fulham, I'm used to drawing a few more games. Like it's been, and also the range of emotions. Just if you take since the international break, that the depth. Well, actually, no, maybe let's go a bit before that. The high of beating United, but then the high of beating Spurs, and then the depths of losing to Palace. That's one of the lowest I've felt supporting Fulham in an awful long time. Then the kind of high and beating Liverpool, that like, oh my God. And then now this kind of like low again of losing in the last minute to your biggest rivals. That's not normal. Like, not most
most teams occasionally draw. No, we just don't draw. We don't draw games.
I mean,
we're like the anti-Parma. Have you seen this? Parma in Serie A have drawn like 7 games in a row. And that's how they're trying to inch themselves free of relegation. Like, we are the anti-Parma.
But weirdly, at the beginning of this season, we had a run of like only drawing games as well.
Yeah,
like
the weird unbeaten streak where we didn't pick up any points.
It's just been quite temperamental, and it's then not surprising that, and obviously look, social media is a microcosm, it's also a bubble. I also, we had an email from someone not too long ago saying that they think that we pay too much close attention to what's said on Twitter, and it's not real kind of indication of what most Fulham fans are saying. And I do actually agree with it for what it's worth. The algorithm on X wants to make you angry and make you emotional, and probably most Fulham fans are much more measured in real life.
Yeah, I really don't need any help to get emotional either.
So I see what you're saying, Jack. It just also has been a pretty extreme couple of months. Beat Southampton and hopefully all will be right with the world again.
Yeah, let's beat Saints and have a breath.
Yeah. All right, that'll do for the pod today. Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you, Sammy. Always a pleasure.
Yasmin, very well done for earning your £10. She's really happy with herself. I'm still annoyed I made that bet. I really thought that was safe money.
Don't know me as well as you did. Thought you did.
No. A bit like I thought those horses at your stag do were safe money as well.
No one thought they were safe money, mate. Nobody thought they were safe money.
We'll be back on Monday with a review of everything that happens at Southampton. Liz is hosting this podcast,
Fantastic.
Which is a nice change. So make sure you listen or watch on Monday. We'll have the review of everything that happens on the South Coast. I'm heading down. I'm going with Dan Cook and his dad down to St Mary's. They've changed the away end.
Have they?
So the away end's now in a different place.
Well, there you go. A new part of the ground for you to see.
Can't wait. It's always a bit nothing, St Mary's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the old Dell, but like apparently it was a very, very special place. St Mary's has always felt a bit soulless to me.
Yeah, there are some bowls, new bowls where it's like, oh, they've actually like.
I quite like the bridge over to it. That's what I will say about St Mary's. Fair enough, got a nice bridge.
Last time I went to St Mary's, saw Rishi Sunak go to the game, and his convoy went past me.
And there you go. What a day.
Just after they'd been relegated as well. Felt like a bit of a strange choice for him to go to that game in hindsight. One of many blunders. Anyway, thanks very much for watching and listening today. We'll be back next week. You-ites.
You-ites.